I am so excited to be shooting this video. I'm all about boundaries. Boundaries are difficult, especially if you're new to them. So there wasn't sort of the constant, oh, when is she due, blah, 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 blah. There was none of that. Remember, it's all good and well having a boundary, but what makes the difference is keeping it there despite any resistance. Boundaries are really important when you're going through big shifts in your life, like giving birth. You just need that time to start to adjust and acclimatise to your new, beautiful, growing family. But putting down boundaries, especially during that time when emotions are high, hormones are all over the place, and fatigue is a real challenge, can be really, really tricky. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through how to successfully, assertively, and compassionately set boundaries to protect you, preserve your space before birth and with everything that comes after. So this video is split into 4 parts. Part 1, why we need boundaries and why boundary setting can be hard. Part 2, my experience with setting boundaries and what I would do differently. Part 3, how do you set your boundaries? And part 4, my final thoughts. So why do we need boundaries during pregnancy, birth and after? Boundaries are really important. They give us a safe space to protect and preserve our time and our energy. When you're about to give birth, you are going to be knackered, you're going to be overwhelmed, and yet you will still need to find time to sort out your cupboards, get your birth plan in order, travel to your appointments, travel back, tidy up the house, do what you need to do to feel prepared for your new arrival. And all of that takes time. So it's really important that you save up whatever energy you can beforehand, so that you've spread yourself evenly and the candle isn't burning at both ends. So boundary setting can be hard if you're new to setting boundaries and or if it's met with resistance. When you put down a boundary and essentially say no or not today, some family and friends will totally get it and they will respect your choice and your boundary, but some family and friends won't, and you will be met with some resistance. Navigating that can be really tricky. The ones that don't take too kindly to your boundary are usually the ones that were taking advantage of the fact that there wasn't a boundary there in the first place. And they are the very reason why you need to put those boundaries down, like now. I'm going to share with you a story, and this example, it reinforced the reason why boundaries are just so important. So I went for an ad hoc scan in my 2nd trimester while I was waiting in the waiting room, which was a room that was shared with people waiting to go in the labour ward to visit mums that had given birth. I found myself sat near a couple. They were the mum and dad of a daughter who was currently in labour, and it appeared as though that they'd travelled quite a distance to come and see her. A midwife came out of the labour ward, took them aside and said to them that their daughter doesn't want any visitors right now. In fact, they've already got her in-laws in the room, and after that they just don't really want to see anyone right now. And I think she was in active labour, so it was all kicking off for her. Upon receiving the news, the mum was not happy. In fact, she just stormed off and created a massive scene and just was like, right, we've come all this way, what are we going to do? She was sulking, she was angry. And I did feel some compassion towards her, but equally I felt compassion towards the mum that was in labour who just put a boundary down. Setting that boundary for that mum was successful. I found boundary setting really hard because growing up in my culture, I didn't really learn about boundaries. In fact, the cultural norms were to put others first, particularly elders. The needs of others came before the needs of your own. You help others, you serve others. If there's any time left at the end of the day, when you've done everything that that you need to do, you can start to think about yourself behind closed doors, because anything related to self-preservation just felt a bit selfish. So I didn't really have any boundaries. I didn't know what they were, and this can be a really slippery slope. Not having boundaries and letting people essentially walk all over you because you're all about meeting their needs can be really damaging, because you have no time and space for yourself. So you end up exhausted, you end up angry and resenting yourself. And if you don't know what boundaries are, you're not sure why you're angry with yourself. If you do know what boundaries are, but you're too afraid to put them down, you end up resenting yourself for that reason as well. So now I'm going to take you through how I shaped my boundaries to suit my needs during my birth experience, where I put them and why. Some of the boundaries that I put down you might not agree with, and that's okay. Just hear me out. Listen to what I've got to say. Pick what you like, discard what you don't like, and think about what you would do differently, because ultimately, this is all about you and your experience. Boundary number 1. I decided quite early on in my pregnancy that no one would accompany me to my scans apart from my birth partner. I just felt there would just be too much pressure, too much expectation, and I just wouldn't be able to handle it. I'm going to give you an example of how I needed to reinforce that boundary. I was in my final trimester and my parents came over to help me and support me during this time. I was having a lot of growth scans and it was just all very, very stressful and overwhelming. So my mum kindly suggested that she attend with me that morning, the morning of my scan, and I said no, kindly and compassionately and diplomatically and everything else. And I could see that my mum's face just sort of dropped. But I explained my reasons why. I just said, you know what, I need the drive. I need that time to process my emotions and get through my anticipation and my anxiety before I get to that scan. And my mum understood and she got it, and that was fine. But that was me putting down my boundary. Let's go through my second boundary. So this boundary is all about calling people after you have a scan. So with my pregnancy, it was very high risk and it involved a lot of scans. At one point I was having 3 scans a week. It was just a lot. And in the past, after a scan, I would call certain family members and talk to them about the scan and the findings and all of that, and it would literally be as I'm walking back to my car with my husband. In hindsight, I should have used that time to just allow myself the chance to discuss it with my husband, having that journey to just be. Because what was happening is, as I was calling family and friends and talking to them about my scan, I found that I had put myself into a position where I was helping others with their anxieties with this pregnancy rather than dealing with my own. And what would end up happening is, after the telephone call, I would end up more drained and knackered and fearful than I did going into the scan in the first place. So I decided after a scan I just was going to have a chat with my husband, and that was a boundary that I put down, and it protected and preserved my energy, and honestly I would hugely recommend it. Boundary number 3. So this boundary is all about having close family and friends over around the time of my due date. Now, I had a planned C-section, so I knew when I was giving birth, and I used that as my point of, right, so 2 weeks before this date, 3 weeks before this date, 4 weeks before this date, I'm not going to have anyone come visit. And it was a boundary that I put down so that I had that time to finish off whatever I needed doing, catch up with a bit of meditation, finish the last remnants of nesting, all of that kind of thing. If you aren't having a planned C-section, you can use your due date as a point of which you start thinking about when you want to stop having guests around, if this is a boundary that you think you need. Boundary number 4. I told my parents and my in-laws that I didn't want anybody to know about my pregnancy until the baby was born. It's your choice ultimately with how you navigate your birth announcements. With very close family and friends, I did have a little birth announcement made, which I sent electronically, and I will just put it up for you now. So I thought that was really sweet and intimate. But otherwise, with other friends and distant relatives and so forth, I just didn't want anyone to know. And I just didn't want that added pressure. And it worked for me. Boundary number 5. So this boundary is all about letting other people know when my baby was born. Now this was super easy for me in a way, because actually not a lot of people knew that I was pregnant anyway. So there wasn't sort of the constant, oh, when is she due? When is she due? Blah, 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 blah. There was none of that. So I told my parents and in-laws that I didn't want anybody else to know that the baby was born until I gave them the green light. And what my husband and I decided to do was just have a couple of days to ourselves, bring the baby home, acclimatise to now becoming a family of 3, and, just catching up on me time, establishing breastfeeding, having a cat nap with my daughter, all of these magical things I wanted to do with my husband and my daughter without having to deal with like an influx of messages 24/7. And I think this was a super helpful boundary for me because I'd had a C-section, I was in the hospital for over 24 hours. So the day I got back, I was knackered. And then like the next day, which would have been 2 days after giving birth, I was still in a post-birth haze. I was in shock and I just needed that time. So the next boundary follows on from the first, and it's all about afterbirth. And this was not seeing anybody for the first 2 weeks. And I found this really important for the same reasons that I've already gone through. Just having that space to adjust to this new, delicate, beautiful, unfolding chapter in my life, getting through the motions of midwife appointments, all of that kind of thing. Okay, so now that I've gone through some of the boundaries that I set before birth and after birth, let me now take you through anything that I would do differently. There are a few things. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. The first thing that I would have done, and this stems back to when I gave birth. So I gave birth in lockdown. My husband wasn't there. I was all by myself. I spent a lot of time on my phone, on Canva, trying to create my birth announcement for my family and friends, grappling with Wi-Fi and whatnot, and all while my baby was sleeping. And really I should have put a boundary down between me and my phone. I even FaceTimed 1 or 2 people, which I hugely regret, and it's taken me a really long time to forgive myself for that because I did it at the expense of my time and my energy. Another boundary that I would put down if I was to do it again would be keeping that same boundary between me and my phone even after coming home, especially in the first sort of week or 2. Part 3, how do you set your boundaries? Okay, so let's now move away from me and my experiences and focus on you and yours. Before you start setting boundaries, it's important to first visualize what you want your birth experience to look like. And I know what you're thinking, it never goes to plan. I get that. But in an ideal world, if certain motions did go to plan, how would you like them to look? What does it look like for you? Because once you've figured out what it all looks like for you, then you can figure out where you need to put your boundaries. So to help you with this, I've formulated 4 questions, which is a real starting point, I think, and it will really help you think about boundaries in the context of your birth experience. Do you want help in the final few weeks of your 3rd trimester? Do you want more than one birth partner present during birth? Do you want grandparents over immediately post-birth or during the lead up to birth? When does the world get to know about your little bundle of joy? So once you've figured all of that out, you know what your birth plan looks like for you, you can pinpoint the areas that need boundaries. and you can start figuring out time frames to get the message across, which is essentially putting the boundary down. With that being said, you might decide last minute that actually I need a boundary here, this will work really well for me. That's okay. It doesn't matter if it's last minute. It'd be nice to have a bit of time to have conversations and set boundaries, because then having a bit of time allows you to deal with resistance. But that's not to say you can't shift and change and swap and move your boundaries otherwise. I'll give you an example of a time frame that I used in relation to a boundary that I set. A boundary that I set was that I didn't want to have anyone but my husband at home with me when I came back from the hospital after being discharged from my planned C-section. So that was my boundary. It was just going to be me, my husband and my daughter. I set this boundary during my second trimester of pregnancy. That time frame worked really well for me. There were a few times where it was asked if I was definitely sure that's what I wanted to do, but I kept my boundary there because it was a boundary that worked for me and my family. So when it comes to the actual conversation, so when you're setting that boundary down, you want to be assertive, but you also want to be compassionate, diplomatic and delicate, because while this is your birth experience, it is also a grandparent's experience. It's also an aunt's experience. It means something special to other people. And I think it's important to handle that with care and compassion. So I'm now going to give you an example of a conversation that I would have with regards to my boundary. We've been thinking about what's going to happen after the baby's born, and we've decided that it would work really well for us if we just come home and there's not anyone there, just to give us a bit of a chance to adjust so that I can establish feeding and rest. And we really want to share this special time with you, but we think it will be extra special once we're all rested and we're all settled. It's hard to put a timeline on when that's going to be because I've not actually experienced it yet, but we think that what makes sense would be to keep it a bit open, go with the flow. We'll be in touch, obviously, and when it feels right for you guys to come, we'll invite you over. That is what, for me, a compassionate and assertive conversation looks like when you are first setting down your boundary. If it helps, write it out before. Rehearse it with your birth partner, with someone whom you're close to. When it comes to having these conversations, they can be difficult because boundaries are difficult, especially if you're new to them. Feel comfortable with them, believe in them, own them before you go out and start putting them down. What if you're met with resistance? I would say expect this to happen, and if it doesn't, then be pleasantly surprised. Even though you can deliver a boundary with compassion in the sweetest, kindest, most articulate way, you're still essentially saying no, and the recipient of that can feel rejected and unwanted and just take it really personally. So I think it's important to be mindful of that. So how do you deal with resistance? Well, I've already gone over one aspect, and that is giving yourself plenty of time if you've already thought a boundary through so that you can deal with this right now, this resistance. Have the support of someone around you. So for me, it was my husband, my birth partner, and in some situations we worked together and set boundaries together, and that really helped me feel supported and not alone in this process. If someone isn't happy with your boundary and they're pushing against it and they're resisting it, set aside more time to go through it with them. Understand what their reservations and concerns are, and if you really believe in your boundary, keep it firm and steady, because it's all good and well having a boundary there, but if it can easily be trampled on and it's really soft and shoddy, well then your boundaries lose credibility and people just won't listen and they won't respect them. If you change your mind about a boundary and it just doesn't really fit with you anymore and it doesn't feel comfortable, you are well within your right to change it, adjust it, move it, just put it away. That's absolutely okay. Ultimately, it is always your choice. It's your boundary, your choice, your right, your birth experience. Remember that. And while I'm encouraging you to hold a safe, compassionate space to move through resistance with the recipient of your boundary, don't feel like you have to over justify why you're doing what you're doing. You don't actually have to explain why you're putting down a boundary anyway. Part 4. Final thoughts. These tools can be applied to any aspect of motherhood. They are pretty universal. You will know deep inside when your boundaries are consistently not being respected, and you've just really got to go with your gut and your judgment, and it does get easier with time. While I encourage talking through resistance and moving through it in a safe and compassionate way, you don't have to over justify why you're setting a boundary down. If you're struggling, get additional support, whether this be a close friend, seeking support with a therapist, anyone that is going to be able to offer you tools to help you cope with enforcing boundaries in a safe space and a therapeutic space, perhaps. Right, I'm going to just stretch because I think that is it. I think we're done. Keep those boundaries tall, strong and unwavering. Until next time.